Hey everyone, we're here at the TWiT stage at NAB and having a lot of fun, just seeing a lot of really cool technologies, kind of the technologies behind the technologies. That's a little bit about what we're going to talk about today. We've got Sean Safreed, CMO of Pixvana, on the stage here. Thank you so much for joining us today, Sean.
Thanks for having me.
It's great.
Here.
I'm super stoked because I'm like all in on this whole VR thing. Virtual reality it's exploding right now. It really seems like it's just grabbing the attention of people who are fans of technology and people who have no idea. It's been on the horizon for so long.
Yep, exactly.
And it really kind of seems like it's having its moment. Would you agree with that right now? Does it feel like there's a difference right now with VR?
Oh, absolutely. 2016 is definitely the first year of VR. Where it's really coming real. You know, people are just now getting Oculus headsets and Vive headsets where they can plug them into PCs and actually start experiencing good VR.
Yeah, it's a good foundation. So before we get into a little bit about what Pixvana is all about, tell us a little bit about yourself. You're a founding member of Pixvana,
right.
But what's a little bit of your background?
So I have been doing software development for about 20 years. I've worked at a company called Puffin Designs way back in the 90s with one of my colleagues who's here, Scott Squires, and our CEO, Forrest Key. And we developed a commercial version of Scott's technology that did rotoscoping and painting.
Okay.
And it was used on a bunch of movie productions back in the 90s.
Tell me a couple, because I have a feeling I might know. Is there Waking Life? That was a rotoscope, a famous rotoscoping one.
That was a totally different technology.
Was it?
He actually built a custom tool to do that movie.
Okay.
It wasn't us. But we did a lot of films where you had to have dangerous shots, like on Gladiator.
Okay.
So they would use our tool to take out the tiger that was swiping at air,
right,
and kind of make it look like he was swiping at the Gladiator. So that was kind of our origin. And then for the last 13 years, I basically have been building visual effects tools and plugins for After Effects and all the video editors at Red Giant, and I'm one of the co-founders there. So, and that business is still going great, and it's still making cool tools, but I really got into the VR thing and wanted to go off and do something new.
I can understand that, especially once you kind of think of the potential, like the kind of looking forward of the potential of what VR could become. It really seems like you're at the ground level of something that's very exciting and has a lot of momentum right now. So
yeah,
that's
exactly.
A good change. Good focus.
That's why we formed the company, because we really felt like this is going to be a new medium. It really is kind of like the dawn of television. It's something that's going to be both the same and different. It allows you to consume media or have interactive experiences, but it could be both of those things at the same time.
Sure. And many things that we don't know yet.
Right.
It's still so early. We don't know where this is going
invented.
to mature. So I guess start from the beginning as far as Pixvana is concerned. What are you aiming to solve specifically as a company in the world of VR?
Well, I think part of the foundational problem we wanted to solve was just the artifacting and the lack of quality in some of the VR videos, specifically on mobile. In the Gear VR, you had a lot of softness, and that's mostly related to the streaming quality is pretty poor, and the field of view is really only looking at a small bit of the image at once. So there's a lot of naive approaches out there to streaming, and we really wanted to fix that problem because we're a bunch of video geeks that have been doing this for 20 years, and we just looked at that and it felt like a huge letdown.
Yeah, it really feels like that is still kind of one of the downsides of any of the VR that I've played around with. It's better than it was, but it's still, you get a little bit of that kind of, the delivery, it's never quite as sharp. Part of that, of course, is the technology, the headset itself. What is the maximum resolution that it can produce?
Sure.
But it's never quite as real as I have a really good feeling eventually it's going to be.
Exactly.
And your delivery, I mean, this is content delivery, essentially, is what Pixvana is kind of focused on, right? Using it through the cloud.
Yeah, that's one of the technologies we're working on in the lab at the moment. So we look at this as kind of an end-to-end problem. You want to start with the largest possible master that you can, and we're focusing on two things. We're making bets in the cloud and making bets on VR video consumption.
Okay.
Because we think that many people are going to want kind of a lean-back experience where they're isolated in headsets and can fully immerse themselves in the content. But to do that, you really need to have great visuals. and you need to have a great story. Those are kind of the two elements of immersion. If you can have spatial immersion where you feel like you're there, and you can have story or narrative immersion where you feel like you're lost in the story, then you really can get immersed. And it's different than gaming where you have this interactive immersion where your body is participating and you feel like you're in the space. And that's great, and it can happen much faster, but the same thing can happen with books and movies because you get lost in the story.
Sure.
And we think if the video quality is good enough and it's not getting in the way, then you're going to have a great experience and you're going to start to feel like, wow, I was just someplace else.
Yeah, kind of building a strong foundation underneath, and that kind of widens the potential just at the very starting point, the beginnings of whatever project anyone's trying to deliver.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So for us, the cloud piece, we basically took some technology that we had at Red Giant, we've licensed that to Pixvana, and it's sort of a core framework piece for us that basically allows us to build a system that can process these VR masters and turning it into a easily consumable VR stream.
Okay.
So the technology is programmable, it'll be scalable in Amazon or Azure or other kinds of cloud systems using GPUs. You'll be able to do color correction and other types of things directly in the cloud, process that out, and then we're building a video delivery and client system that allows us to consume video that always looks perfectly sharp in whatever headset you're in, right? So if you have a headset that is like a Gear and you have a certain resolution, a certain field of view, we're going to process the perfect version for that. And then if you have a higher end headset or something else that has a different field of view, like a Vive that has a little bit bigger field of view, we'll do a separate master for that, going all the way back to the original plates and processing it through and delivering it to you in a dynamic way. So what we're doing is somewhat similar to what Facebook has done with dynamic streaming, kind of switches based on what you're looking at, but we think there's other content aware approaches as well, because a lot of times you have a VR setup where the camera is still and the lights above us aren't moving, the floor isn't moving, there's a lot of stuff that's not moving in the scene, it's just us. So you could do a lot of content compression around just focusing on the characters and the story as well, and that'll give you a stream that you could really feel like you're at 4, 8, or 10K of resolution, and then you could start to do other kinds of framing as well.
Right.
You could, if you have a really, really large resolution, you could do post-process or on-the-fly processing for punch-in or zoom. You know, you can get framing for close-ups, you know, based on the head position or head tracking. So there's a lot of interesting things you can do in VR, and that's just, we're right on the cusp of being able to do that. So part of the technology we're building is enabling those kinds of experiments.
Wow, that's interesting. Obviously, a lot of challenges cloud just in and of itself is a challenging environment.
Yep.
Then you take all of these complicated kind of scenarios and potentials just surrounding VR and just kind of the dynamic underpinnings of what VR is all about, and you mix that with the cloud, that seems like a minefield of challenges. What are some of the biggest challenges that you've encountered kind of in kind of ramping up right now?
Well, I think the biggest one for us as a team, I think we all know image processing well. We're starting to get our feet grounded in the cloud stuff and building a dynamic cloud processing system. So I feel like the company is well on its way to doing that well. Doing the streaming and the dynamic playback, that's hard, because to make sure that you don't get sick, you really have to do it fast, and a lot of that depends on how quickly you can sense when the head is turning, how fast the head is turning, get that information back to the cloud so that you can process the right stream to the client. So there's a lot of interaction there where you don't have full control over the environment. You know, the phone can start to slow down just because it's getting heated up.
Yeah, right.
Like, you can be on a Wi-Fi network and suddenly it goes away, and so the network can totally drop. So there's a lot of challenges just in that piece that I feel like we're starting to work out ways that we might compensate, but it's a tough problem to get right.
Yeah, it sounds like maybe a little bit of that kind of that evil latency that always seems to creep up when you're dealing with video on the internet and everything. I don't know. Is that kind of what you're talking about here? Because I guess from what I'm understanding from what you're saying, in VR it's not necessarily as simple as here's a video stream and do whatever you want with it. There is that interactivity. There is that, head tracking is a really good example of that. That's going to change the dynamics of the video that you are even sending to begin with. So what kind of latency are you talking about in that regard?
Well, the time from when you move your head to when the display gets updated is what you call motion to photon. It's kind of the term of art that Samsung and Facebook have built.
Yeah.
And ideally you want that to be within 1 frame time, so less than 20 milliseconds. That's really, really hard on a network when a lot of times the latency is 50 or 100 milliseconds. So now could be 3-5 frames behind, and if you're 5 frames behind, your body starts to figure that out really quick.
Yeah, that's detectable by the brain, for sure.
So, but, as the next-gen networks come along, a lot of this is going to get solved in kind of infrastructure changes. So, AT&T is starting to talk about 5G, or Verizon talking about 5G, and, for today's voice communication and cellular, 20 milliseconds is fine. But they're talking about bringing that down to 1 or 2 milliseconds. So if you could do 1 or 2 millisecond delay on voice, well, you can do 1 or 2 milliseconds on data as well. And that means that in a few years, we'll be able to do wirelessly what today requires a very high-speed connection wired.
And at that point, it's practically imperceptible by the brain at all, right?
A couple milliseconds is not.
You're not going to even detect that.
Yeah, you're not going to have the update speed on the headset that's going to be fast enough to keep up with that.
Right. Good point. So yesterday YouTube announced its live 360 streaming, which sounds pretty incredible, right? Just the thought of, I think the example I read was you've got, a major NBA basketball game. There's only so many front row seats that anyone could ever possibly buy. So instead, we'll put you in that seat in a live sense, but in VR, and it's just this crazy shared experience in this immersive environment. I imagine live is part of what you guys have on the roadmap. How difficult is that? That sounds like that is incredibly difficult to do.
It is. I think it's not so hard if you're willing to have some level of latency.
Right.
If you're willing to be behind the stream by a minute or two.
Yeah, which probably doesn't matter that much.
It's okay. But a lot of the problem comes from just getting the data up to the networks. Like, you have to have a teardeck or other devices that you bond together, and then hopefully you get the streams up, or you have to be, like in this kind of scenario, you would need a 50 megabit connection to get a good VR stream up to the cloud. Get that out, process it, and then go back to the headset. That's a big challenge. Even if you have a supercomputer in the cloud doing all the processing, that's tough.
Yeah.
So, for us, I think the first thing we want to tackle is less on the live side and more on the cinematic side, because we're all storytellers and think about that end of it a lot. And starting with a really high resolution, cinematic master plate, where you're starting with 10 or 12K of resolution, means that you can kind of future-proof yourself for other headsets that are going to come along down the line.
Right.
Today's headsets they're basically 1440p displays that are either together or you have one for each eye. But those are going to go to 2K pretty quickly, probably within 18 months, and you might get to 4K not too soon after that per eye. So now the pixels, even if they're this close, are going to be really, really imperceptible. Like impossible at 1200 dpi for you to see individual pixels on the screen. So that really is immersive, because your brain is completely full. There's no screen door effect.
Right.
It looks absolutely pristine. So that I think is what kind of excites me, is that future potential. I think there's also potential in the way the headsets evolve so that you can have interactivity. So if you have a headset that had eye tracking, for example, now you could have a setup or interaction on the headset that feels completely natural. So if I'm looking at something, I could be teleported to that space. Just by moving and gazing at one point in the video stream, I might be able to switch to a new location or change the storyline. So there's a lot of potential in that, just by having something that is a completely unobtrusive interaction design, where you don't feel like you're having to have a gamepad or wands or other kind of crazy things. Like, you could just do it through looking, and that would be amazing, because now your brain is completely full. You just look somewhere and you're teleported there. It's like, wow.
Yeah, I'm definitely understanding kind of the challenge right now. Just it feels like there's kind of an evolving platform war going on where everybody wants to have the VR solution that everybody,
Yes.
the masses are going to adopt. It's just not going to be that way. It sounds like Pixvana is really just about making sure that no matter what the content is, no matter what the user is using, it can identify exactly what your parameters are. Do you have the hand controllers? Are you just a goggle? Are you lower res, high res, whatever? And really kind of scale that video to be perfect for whatever platform you're using.
You got it. That's exactly what our goals are. Is we want to make multiple clients, software clients that can read these streams and play them back on multiple devices, even devices that haven't come along yet. Mm-hmm. So in the future, if you end up with a set of devices that is as lightweight and as simple as putting on a pair of glasses or sunglasses, mm-hmm. that's the ideal, because that means there's not as much commitment to the device itself. I think that's part of the challenge, and I think that's part of why people are somewhat turned off by it, because they feel like, wow, I'm putting this pound-and-a-half thing on top of my head, and that's a commitment. Like, now you've had to drop into it, whereas taking out your phone and looking at it, that's easy. If it was as easy as putting on a pair of glasses, like, people do that all the time. It's a natural social thing to do, and you would feel like, oh, okay, I'm in VR or AR, whatever, and that would make the ability to go into a story or a place much, much more natural.
Fascinating. Now, you raised $6 million last December.
Right.
When, and I have to imagine you guys are kind of ramping up at this point, when does Pixvana kind of come to market? When can the solution be reaching potential partners?
Well, because we had a very good seed round, we were able to sort of give ourselves some runway, so that we have a pretty long time to experiment with some of these systems and challenges and start to solve those. But in the summer, you'll definitely see the first iteration of our cloud processing, the first iteration of our playback systems, likely on something like the Vive and the Gear, because we've been early adopters of both of those systems. So look for that in the summer, and then likely in 2017 you'll see us go to market, and we'll start to actually have real products and a business that will be based on those products.
Yeah, right.
Whereas today, a lot of what we're doing is really about building foundational architecture and the right technologies and solving some of these problems. And part of that is it's just such a dynamic space. Even here at the show, people are announcing multi-stream coalescing, like the Teradek Sphere or the Aura camera. There's multiples of these devices that are just haven't even shipped or are about to ship, that will start to solve some of the live problems, start to solve some capture and stitching problems. So I think we're trying to be a little bit patient, because the market is changing so quickly.
But yet, at the same time, there are so many new players kind of on the horizon. These are challenges that they are going to face. So the fact that you are there with a solution, working on it, it's perfect timing for everybody.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's why we made this bet late last year to start building this stuff, because we know that it's going to come along in the next 2 years. It's going to explode.
Yeah.
Already this year, they're predicting probably 8 million headsets in the market for 2016.
Wow.
That's a pretty substantial market. It's a tiny fraction compared to mobile devices or PCs.
For sure.
But next year it doubles again. The year after that it probably doubles again. So, in a short order, the market will be larger than the iPad market.
That's what they're saying. They're like 10 years down the line, it's the VR is going to be what smartphones are now. I don't know about that, because VR, at least in its current iteration, has kind of a certain scenario in which you would use it versus a smartphone being an everywhere kind of device. But who knows? Like you said, when we get to a point to where it's a matter of just putting on a pair of glasses you already have, and that contains the things that you're doing here, that's a different scenario entirely. Then yes, everybody does have it. Why wouldn't you?
You can imagine. I mean, people have already talked about it and described these devices where, it's basically just like a pair of sunglasses. You put it on, it may have a small wire, and it goes to a mobile phone.
Yes.
So in 2 or 3 years, you could have something as simple as, like a pair of headphones. You just put it on there. All the processing is on the mobile device, but the display is built here.
And it's just a display.
and it's
Yeah.
just a display. Everything sort of depends on the battery and the processing and the network on your mobile device, but the display gives you the ability to have that immersion or teleportation so that you could go someplace. You could be part of this crowd where you're watching us live, or you could go to a family event, or go see something that, a place that you want to visit maybe next year if you want to go on vacation. So there's a million scenarios you can imagine if those streams were out there that you could easily consume, and you had a device that was easy to put on and take off.
Right, right.